Hello, and welcome back to Radio NIGP, where the theme for the month is Grab Bag, Purchasing Ideas. Thank you for joining us, and this month we are going to be bringing you a grab bag of ideas. On today's broadcast, you will hear from your colleagues about mandatory pre-bids, to have or not to have, mentorship ideas, surplus, what do we do with it? Professional services. What is it and how do we handle it? And from our construction colleagues, non-payment of subcontractors. Another update from You Don't Look Good in Orange. We're going to hear live interviews from Florida's FAPO conference on pressing issues from our Florida colleagues' perspectives. And also listen for interviews with NIGP staff about pathways learning and new calendar options for your selection. So stay tuned and thank you for spending time with us. Have a great day and enjoy the broadcast.
Hey, NIGP friends, welcome to another episode of Hot Topics on Radio NIGP. I'm David Nash, holding down the fort for the Hot Topics crew today. And we're doing something a little different this time. We've invited one of our Radio NIGP colleagues from another committee, Legally Speaking, Kirk Buffington. And Kirk and I worked together in the city of Fort Lauderdale for 10 years. And what we're going to talk about today is mandatory pre-bids. And since I worked for Kirk, I know his policy was we're not doing mandatory pre-bids. So, Kirk, why don't you go ahead and talk about that policy and your reasoning behind it and any issues that you see with using mandatory pre-bids.
Well, thank you, Dave. And it's great to be on Radio NIGP speaking on Legally Speaking and representing our Legally Speaking team. Mandatory pre-bids. The number one reason I have never been a strong proponent or advocate for mandatory pre-bids is you are going to possibly lose competition. There are any number of reasons that a vendor may not be able to or cannot show up at a mandatory pre-bid. So if you put yourself in that position and your mandatory pre-bid starts and you have a single bidder at your mandatory pre-bid, you have essentially become a sole source solicitation. And if it's not necessary to be sole source, if it's not required because of exemptions, then we should not be encouraging that kind of thing to happen. And once that single bidder is aware that they are the only bidder that's going to be able to bid, they have opened the doors, you have opened the doors to exorbitant pricing. They will know they are the only player in the sandbox when the time comes to have that bid submitted. So that is my number one reason. And I'll even go so far as to cite a particular court case that I found several years ago about mandatory pre-bids. And that is a case that came out of Louisiana. It's Gibbs Construction v. Louisiana State University. And in this particular case, they were doing some renovation, remodeling at one of the university's facilities. The architect and project manager put together the bid and scheduled a mandatory pre-bid. So time comes, a single bidder is at the mandatory pre-bid. That alone says you've got a single competition. Now, what made this case even more interesting is the architect, agent on record, chose to invite another contractor to submit a bid, even though that contractor was not at the mandatory pre-bid. Contractor submitted a bid. The one contractor that was there, and that bid by the other contractor was the low responsible bid. Because as we all know, that's when we have problems, is when we make exceptions and we have to deal with somebody that's out of the box, if you will. So LSU went to award the bid to that bidder who had submitted the bid but not attended the mandatory pre-bid. And Gibbs, who was that bidder that attended the pre-bid, filed suit. Ultimately, the appellate level court in Louisiana determined that no, you cannot invite another bidder to submit a bid when you said you're going to have a mandatory pre-bid. Mandatory means mandatory.
Yeah.
So even trying to correct the imperfection is more than likely going to cause you issues. So those things together has always been the reason I don't like pre-bids or mandatory pre-bids. Now, granted, there may be specific occasions where a mandatory pre-bid may be necessary. Security issues.
Right.
David and I ran a public water utility. And post 9/11, security got very, very tight at those types of facilities. So when work was being done at one of our water utility buildings, we would have a mandatory pre-bid. But otherwise, goods, services, normal construction, I don't see the use of a mandatory pre-bid. I don't see its positives in those kinds of situations. And in fact, I think it can cause significant problems down the road.
Yeah.
So that is my illustrations of issues with pre-bids, mandatory pre-bids.
It's interesting you mentioned security on our water plant, and I, for a time before I got into procurement, I was the supply officer of the police department for 4 years. And that's a secure facility. You have to be invited into that building. So prisons, police departments, and other secure facilities, there are often times when you would schedule a pre-bid of some kind and make it mandatory because of the security issue. It just had people calling up or knocking on the door and come.
Hey, I want to tour your building.
Yeah, I want to tour the building. I want to put I want to answer your solicitation. Let me ask you this. So typically we do our pre-bids early in, the solicitation's out on the street for a week or so, and we schedule the pre-bid so people have time to find out about it. If we have a situation where one person had shown up, one vendor had shown up, is there a way to fix this before the bid opening?
Yes, I believe so. And that would be simply scheduling another pre-bid.
Right.
There's nothing in the mandatory pre-bid that says that's the only pre-bid you can have.
Right.
So to correct your deficiency, just schedule another pre-bid. And again, like you said, if you schedule your first one early enough on in your solicitation process, you should still have enough time to schedule an additional pre-bid.
Right.
It reminds me of best and final offers.
Oh, yeah.
And we worked, well, I think you had already left the city, but I worked for a particular city manager one time, was working for this particular city manager, and we were going through a BAFO. And I don't remember what it was for. So we did a BAFO. We got responses back. I thought pretty good responses. The city manager looked at them because it was a pretty high profile project. And he said, I don't like these. I think we can do better. Do another best and final. And I looked at him and I said, what part of final am I not getting? Yeah. I did it because he directed me to, but you have to play by the rules you set.
Right.
And
that's
we are compliance people.
Yeah.
At the end of the night, we are compliance people.
Exactly. And I remember that. I mean, 10 years. I don't think I ever did a mandatory pre-bid while I was there. For you folks out there in NIGP land, if you're interested in a further discussion on BAFO, if you go back into the archives of Radio NIGP, you'll find about 18 months ago, Hot Topics did a session on BAFO that was kind of interesting, and talked about what happened sometimes, as Kurt just described. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us today. And
absolutely, Dave.
I think that's some good information for people to have out there. And you folks in NIGP, hope to see you at Forum coming up here in a couple of months.
Love to see all of you.
A great event. And join us again for another episode of Radio NIGP.
Hello folks, this is Keith Latz and I'm coming to you from the 56th annual FAPO conference. We are here in beautiful Orlando at the Walt Disney Coronado Springs Resort, and today I'm going to be asking folks the question, what do you believe is the most pressing issue in public procurement and why?
We've been in the program for a short time, on our third session right now. It's been awesome. Joe's been great. The platforms allowed us to connect in a way we might not have connected otherwise. We've been able to meet on a regular basis and share information and support each other in both directions. Joe and I have been talking about that as well. It's been great. I've been able to connect and have someone that was able to guide and advise and coach me in ways that I may have not received in any other way. So I've truly appreciated it. We reference the materials that are available to us, watching videos, and we also have session agendas that we follow.
That's using the new mentorship option together.
Right. It's a great format. I've really appreciated it. Yeah, and it's great value. And I'm looking forward to working with further. We have a number of sessions, that we need to go through. And I truly appreciate Joe's time on this.
Joe, I understand when you're doing something like this, you often as a mentor probably gain just as much, if not more, knowledge or learning than the mentee. What do you think about that, Steve?
It's absolutely true. I just said it before we even started this session, but I was talking to Heidi and I said, you're teaching me. I view things in our profession especially as having never arrived. I can learn something from anybody that's willing to teach me or show me or guide me as well, if I'm willing to listen and take something. And I remember the first session with Heidi, she said something as I was asking questions. She said, I'm trying to find my why. And she said that about her professional, pathway, if you will. And I said, I'm writing that down. And I haven't forgotten it because now we're together, we're looking for her why, and I'm trying to show her exactly why she's on this pathway that she's on. She's on a great path, and I've tried to pair her up with some other people that have similar pathways and goals, that they've just done it just ahead of her, so she's meeting people in our chapter and here at FAPO and later I'm sure at Forum and NIGP Forum. So yeah, it's been a great relationship, and I am learning along the way as well.
And Joe, you've been using the Together platform as well. What are your thoughts about the platform?
It's great to have the structure because it allows everybody has some homework, okay? Both sides, mentor, mentee, both have homework. And there are things that you have to do to be prepared for each session, each meeting, and each conversation. So it keeps you accountable. And you're able to keep each other accountable about that homework and the things to prepare you for those conversations. So yeah, it's a great structure, and it's very helpful to have.
Well, thank you, because I want to announce now that the Together platform is soon going to be open to anyone at any time, where you'll be able to sign up at any time now. It's not going to be structured where you have to sign up at a certain time of the year. You'll be able to start a mentee relationship whenever you can, and it's going to really improve. Heidi, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I have one thing to add. It's great. Do it, people. Sign up. This is awesome, sincerely. It provides so many resources, and it connects you with people that you may not normally have contact with. There's opportunity for individuals to coach you and guide you and lead you to where you need to go. I have so enjoyed it. Sign on.
I want to thank you both, and want to let our audience know that the Together app is now an open format, and you can become a mentor or mentee anytime rather than just waiting for a certain time of the year. It's open. Go in there now and in the NIGP website, www.nigp.org/mentorship, and sign up. Reminding you, this is Keith Glatz coming to you from Orlando, and this is Radio NIGP.
Something we like to do in our own homes every spring is clean the house. That's why it's called spring cleaning. My question to you ladies is, after you go through and you have that pile of stuff that you haven't touched in a year, and you have to do something with it, what are some things that you do with your junk?
So we have had a yard sale before, if we have some good junk left over. So we would do the yard sale, and then at the end of the day, if we still have some things left over, we would take it to one of our local charities.
Very good.
You know, my first thought is always, how can this not go to the landfill? So I tried to think of all the different avenues. Could I resell it? Could I donate it? Could I repurpose it, similar to what Penny was saying?
That sums it up to me too. The important thing is, how much time do we have to put into getting rid of this junk? And I think that also pertains to our work. How much time and effort do we have in putting together what we do with our surplus property?
My response would be that surplus property is the stuff you no longer need. Very simply put,
Its time has come.
time has come.
It's collecting dust. That's pretty simple. NIGP's definition is a little bit more lengthy, but I think that sums it up really, really concise. Penny, anything different that you would say, what is surplus property?
No, that's really the same for us as well. It's come to the end of its useful life for us, and so we're ready to dispose of that. With our surplus property at the city of Knoxville, we try to choose the option that will keep it from going to the landfill. That's always a big concern for us. We try to, we look at the value of it. We do have an option that if it's, really of no value, then we could potentially throw it away. But we do try to either, primarily we try to sell it through Gov Deals, or we may do some donations, especially like with other government agencies. That's an option for another government agency that might be smaller than us, but could definitely still find some useful life in some of our property.
So Valerie, let me then ask you, there is value in surplus property, right? According to work that you've done at your entity?
Yes, there is. It affects the bottom line. We can track how much additional revenue we can generate by choosing the best avenue to dispose of our surplus property. And I track that in my KPIs when I want to show that the things we're doing for the city actually literally impact the bottom line, rather than just throwing things in the trash.
We have one person that handles all of our surplus property, and with the revenue that he brings back in, it basically covers my entire purchasing division costs for the year.
Not just a surplus property program, but your entire office?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And Valerie, how about for your entity? How is it self-supported, or do you have to put any money towards that program at surplus property?
No, we don't support our whole department. That is awesome. But it is not something we have to pay for. We pay for all of the hauling costs and anything that might be associated out of the sales, and it helps offset the cost of the person that supports the program.
Well, the first thing you want to decide if you're going to create your own surplus property program is, are you going to do it internal, external, or a combination? Penny, what do you do in your entity?
So, we have one person who manages the entire program, and we utilize GovDeals through the cooperative to dispose of our property. So we post all of our sales on there. They're advertised through GovDeals, and it's completely handled online. We have our one person then manages the pickup of all those materials. We don't ship, we just do pickup.
But that also takes the consideration that you have your own warehouse or your storage place for those items too, right?
Correct. Yes. So we do have a warehouse. We have a building that we utilize as our warehouse for most of the goods. And then the fleet vehicles are sold from the fleet shops. So we have an impound lot where we have a number of vehicles, and then also another shop where we have the city vehicles that we sell.
And Valerie, what do you do with your surplus property?
That's similar. We're a little bit of a hybrid. So we have one person who oversees and manages the start to end of the program. And we use an auction company that our consortium of cities has selected. We do have a warehouse, but we have a lot of different locations across the city. So we try to streamline as much as people can to collect all of their items that need to go to auction in one place. But when that's not feasible, we've also found different places within the facilities people are in where they can kind of pile things until the next pickup comes to take the items to the auctioneer's site. But similar to Penny with our fleet vehicles, we typically do actually just bid those from our site. And we've actually even had a building that we were decommissioning, and we held an auction at the building rather than trying to get all of that to the auction house.
So if you're posting your own items online, is there a particular language that you would say is very important to have when doing that?
Yeah, I would add definitely there is. We have language that talks about the items being sold as is, no warranty. That way we don't, have somebody get a piece of property home or a vehicle home and it's not what they expected and try to bring that back. So we have developed some very clear language about it's sold as is, period.
So the question may come up, if you're selling surplus property, if it was bought with grants or federal funds, are there different steps that you would need to consider?
It is very important to be aware of the terms and conditions of the grants that you're using to purchase goods and commodities with, because they could have specific requirements about the disposition of any commodities purchased with those funds. For example, in 2 CFR 200, which is the Uniform Grant Guidance, they have particular requirements about what they expect from the entity receiving the federal grant funds in terms of disposing of that equipment, what kind of reporting needs to go along with it. And there's even a break in the dollar amount or what the residual value of those goods might be. So it's just important to make sure to read and understand the specific terms.
Yeah, you could even, it depends on the grant and the granting authority, but sometimes they either, they may require you to actually sell it as surplus property and then pay a portion of the proceeds back to the granting authority. I know we have even had to actually destroy property and prove that it was destroyed and turn that back into the granting authority.
Well, to respond to the first question that got us into this segment, where would you find an SOP manual to start your own program? Well, you did the right thing. You posted on Perch Issues and you got tons of responses, but you could also go to the NIGP library and do a search for surplus property. And then also I find going to particular entities' websites, you get a great property manual that includes great descriptive language on their property system. So I encourage you to continue posting on Perch Issues, look in the library, and then also do your own homework and search other entities online.
One of the most pressing issues is the market volatility. There's vendors that are unable to hold pricing, and we find ourselves having to replace contracts prior to their expiration, and vendors unable to bid because they're unsure they'll be able to hold pricing.
Well, there's several, but the biggest one right now is the increase in prices in water and wastewater chemicals.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the June broadcast. This month, Radio NIGP is tackling really sort of a grab bag of procurement issues. And one of the issues that's come up recently on Insight had to do with some questions around the definition and the application of professional services. And Tara and I have gotten into a fun conversation about different aspects around professional services. But perhaps we should start with the context that, we're used to applying the standard principles of like full and open competition that really applies to services of all types, usually through something like a request for proposals. But let's zoom in just a little bit on whether professional services are any different. Should they be or must they be treated in some special way?
And I think, John, kind of what we were talking about is, first of all, the answer depends. First of all, I think you need to define professional services. And I think we can get there. I think we can jump to that. But different agencies are going to define professional services in different ways. And so to me, it's really going to depend on what do your state statutes allow, what do your local ordinances allow. Some of them clearly define professional services in certain ways. Here in the state of Arizona, professional services primarily focuses on architects and engineers or technical registrants as far as state statute is required. But in my local procurement code, we have carved out a different way of approaching legal services. And so that's a certain type of professional services. I think we have to kind of work through all of that to see how they treat things in a different way. Has your state done anything beyond just the A&E or?
Yeah, in our state, we have a few services that are treated in a special way. You mentioned legal services. I work for state government, and normally our state Department of Justice provides all the legal services for all of the state agencies and the governor's office, period. Boom. But they also do allow for contracting out, and they say any contracting out of legal services has to be handled by the state Department of Justice. They're the ones that do it, and they do not have to follow competition. They can use whatever method they think is appropriate. There's a couple of other ones that show up in our state code. We've got an exemption for bond counsel, which is a specialized type of legal services, and also some like financial advisor services that go along with issuing big bond sales, which is something that can happen at local government too, but it's mostly a big state government thing. So there are those just very few options. And it makes sense to me that it's just as you said, there's no single answer when it comes to professional services. It varies all over the place. What are the definitions? What are the methods and everything else?
I think it's interesting that you talked about those specific legal services and not being subject to competition. And I think from like a business perspective, that makes sense because you don't want to award legal services to a low bidder. You want to choose somebody who's very qualified to do the work. And so if we need to change our rules to get the best option for our agencies, sometimes that makes sense. So I appreciate that. And I think that's really what leads into sort of the most common one, which is architect and engineering services. And, so many states, organizations, whatever we're doing, I would say is a variation of the Brooks Act. The federal government has said that you need to select architects and engineers based on their ability to do the work, not necessarily based on low price. And so I think that this is the one, when somebody says professional services in our field, I think most people default to, hiring technical registrants, that's a special service. So I guess, what is your thoughts on, and I know that there's been discussion on this, qualifications-based selection. And I think that's one of those areas where the answer is it depends. Are there certain thresholds that QBS applies? Are there certain thresholds that you can negotiate as part of your selection? So I don't know, I'm kind of curious your experience, your understanding, and what are the pros and cons, I guess, to the qualifications-based selection?
Well, even before talking about pros and cons, we just have to acknowledge that the application of QBS can vary across the United States. Again, it goes back to you have to look up and see what your local law is. So the Brooks Act at the federal level says one thing. I think something like 44 out of the 50 states have adopted a version of that, but they tinker with it a little bit. And they might add a few more services, or they might exempt some other services. And then there's the whole layer of local government. And sometimes there are laws that apply QBS to architects and engineers at a local level. I think in general, the answer is no, that these laws don't trickle down to the local government level. But that just reinforces that point that you really have to look up and see what the law is that applies to your jurisdiction. Even when we talk about like architects and engineers, they're not the only ones that may or may not be subject to QBS. Just even recently, there was a discussion on Insight just the other day about construction manager at risk, which is also sometimes called CMGC. And the idea is that you bring on a construction manager early in the project design process for a construction project, and they can give you some really valuable perspective by sitting right alongside the engineer or other designer. And they can say, engineer, you're crazy. We can't build it like that. I see what you're designing, but no, you need to know that that's either impossible or really expensive, or there's a better way to do it. So that's why you would bring those people in. So are those folks, these construction managers, should they be subject to QBS? Well, it depends state by state.
In Arizona, they are.
And in California, I think I'm not an expert on California law, but I believe at the state level, they say, yes, you should treat these just like you would the architects and engineers. But at the local level, they don't have to. And then in Florida, I've seen there's an attorney general opinion, and it says, yes, you should treat them like architects and engineers and use QBS. But then that can sometimes run head on into some of the federal procurement requirements that say you must be including cost. You can't exclude costs. So it's going to be really interesting to see that particular question came up on Insight, and it will be fun to see how that discussion thread really develops and see if they can pin down that potential.
I feel like we could talk for 20 minutes on just this alone, John. And I'm going to try to temper myself and not talk forever, but this is the alternative project delivery methods in Arizona statute. So job order contracting, construction manager at risk, and design build in Arizona require a qualifications-based selection, and only one of them allows for a method where price is part of the decision making. I won't get into the details of it. We have explicitly said when we're using ARPA funds and federal funds, I'm not even willing to entertain job order contracts, design build, or construction manager at risk, specifically because of that federal piece. Is there a way that we could justify and say, no, we definitely went through a fair and competitive process and price was a factor in the award? Sure, but it's not worth risking millions of dollars in federal funds to want to use an alternative project delivery method. So these are these places where sometimes procurement gets the bad rap too, because I know my departments are comfortable using job order contracts. They're comfortable using construction manager at risk and design build. And I have to say, wait, how are we funding this? If we're funding it with ARPA funds, no, we can't do that. If we were previously planning to do with our own funds and we did a design build and now you want to use ARPA funds, it's not appropriate. I can't defend that. So I don't know. Like I said, we could talk forever, but I think
we could. Stuff. And I don't think there's a magic bullet legal answer to that particular little conundrum. That's going to have to get played out over time. But I think it's interesting to step back and look and see. So we've got this big picture procurement principle of, looking at all the different factors that should go into a procurement, including price competition or comparison about prices. And yet we've got this one method that says, no, you can't do that. So I think that does cause a problem for a lot of people. In fact, when I go back and look at the big picture, I think, the public deserves really good procurement, meaning that our entities should get to decide what are the factors that are most important. I don't like a method that says you must cover this or you cannot include this, like price consideration. I don't like that because it takes away our professional judgment.
It relegates us to a clerical function.
Yeah, and I think QBS sort of hamstrings an entity by hiding all the information about what makes for good value, because there is no comparison of costs. And in some respects, it also too hamstrings an appreciation of different project approaches or even other procurement factors that we like to put in our RFP, because it sort of exclusively focuses on who is the most qualified. And even that, I put it in air quotes, that most qualified is a criterion that can actually be influenced or manipulated by industry, by the people who are trying to get our business. So that's why I don't particularly like QBS. In the big picture, I view it as a bit of a historical anomaly. There's a reason why the Federal Brooks Act came up when it did, and it was kind of in competition with best value, but people didn't realize it at the time. However, once it was established, I am going to say that the big players in the A&E industry learned how it benefited them financially by steering most of the business to those biggest players. So that's why they fiercely try and protect it and spread it further. In contrast, I'm going to say that the best value selection methods that we all learn most of the time, that's a better method. It balances all the important factors. I think it's a much better approach than QBS. We can emphasize qualifications, experience, but we can also bring in project approach, and we can bring in price and cost information, any other criteria the public deems important.
I think it's one of those examples of law was created to solve a problem. And in solving or addressing that problem, it's created another problem. And back when the Brooks Act was instituted, I mean, really, you didn't want the low bid designing the library, because if the library collapsed and people died, that's a problem. But now it's such a sophisticated realm, and procurement itself is so much more sophisticated. We should be trusted to make best value decisions and say, what are the factors that matter to us? And that is what we will use to determine who is awarded. And it doesn't lock us into accepting the most qualified firm with an inflated price that just happens to get within our budget, because they knew that that's what it would take in order for us to finalize negotiations with them. So
absolutely. This discussion is actually laid out really nicely in an NIGP publication. We have a NIGP position paper that is called, here's the title, it's called Best Value Procurement Methods for Professional Services. So it's right on topic, and it's subtitled Overcoming the Limitations of Low Bid and QBS. So I would suggest listeners go and look that up under publications on the NIGP website.
Absolutely. I think we could keep talking, or we could try to wrap it up here. I just think there's been so many things that we've talked through. We've learned a lot of things. And I think, John, to your point, from procurement professional standpoint, we want good competition. We want best value. And I think it's interesting that we've got these certain areas, whatever your agency might define, whatever your state or local ordinances might define as professional services, it's really a way to take exception to the tenets of open, fair competition. Here's how we modify it. So I think it's a discussion that needs to continue. I think that it's things that may change in the future, or that we need to be pushing for appropriate change in the future. So do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, it's always fun when I get to join the Legally Speaking team. So it was fun to kind of jump ship and join this team. So look forward to more conversations, and thanks for listening to Radio NIGP.
The most pressing issue to me is the importance of valuing the procurement professionals. The procurement professionals bring a tremendous amount of depth and breadth of knowledge, experience. They're certified, they have educational accomplishments and achievements, as well as employment experiences within this specialized, unique field. And just like other areas of discipline, they too should also be appreciated and recognized for the value that they bring. Empower them to do what they know to do.
I feel the most pressing issue for public procurement today is buy-in from leadership and the administrative staff. They need to understand how important public procurement professionals are, the value of the knowledge that we gain from each other, and how we play a support system to everyone within the organization. As public procurement professionals, there's nothing that we can do on our own. We support everyone else. So they need to understand how valuable we are.
Good morning, everyone. Kirk Buffington with Radio NIGP. And this month, we're going to be talking to Chanda Carpenter, who is our Director of Content Research and Development for the Institute. She's going to share a lot of exciting initiatives that are going to be coming up in relation to our Pathways Learning program. Good morning, Chanda.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you.
So, I understand that you are, the Institute, and particularly through the learning initiatives, are taking a look at developing a calendar that will be accessible to our members for planning out a whole year's worth of training and education in one basic time, if you will, and therefore being able to budget easier for their agencies. I am very excited about hearing about that. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so for the past few years, we've developed an Institute calendar offering educational opportunities through our virtual courses. This year, we're expanding that calendar to ensure the entire Pathways portfolio is available annually. So what that means, 12 months. So right now, we've got courses all the way through June of 2024. These are all of our competency modules, and they're available in our virtual instructor-led format. This annual calendar allows entities, chapters, and learners to plan and budget well in advance for their professional development for the entire year.
I think that is so exciting. I also understand that there's going to be some discounts available for students who book ahead, if you will.
That's right. Starting July 1, we're excited to offer a 20% discount on all course registrations for Institute members who enroll in courses 60 plus days in advance.
Great. That is going to be such a great initiative for the members. One, being able to get the discount, but even more importantly, being able to budget for their agency's entire fiscal year. So that's great. So all of the courses and pathways will be available at least once every year moving forward.
That is correct. Now, many of these courses are also available on demand. So be sure and take a look at that as well.
That's right. And do you think we'll be moving maybe toward more face-to-face trainings? What do you see coming?
I believe so. That is the hope. You know, during the pandemic, we were able to shift to virtual instructor-led, and that really has been adopted. It is so flexible for folks. They don't have to travel and really can just hop on courses quickly as they need them. That said, there's so much value in the in-person, face-to-face courses. So I do believe we'll see some more of those, and keep a lookout for those on the schedule.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with us this morning?
Yeah, I'd like to mention our concierge program. This is a really great program that can offer you and your entity career planning. Through this program, learners can work with a procurement professional to map out their professional development plans and create a learning plan. So this can be, if you're new to procurement, or maybe you've been in procurement for a while and you're moving into a leadership role. They'll meet you where you are now and take a look at what your goals are to develop a learning plan.
That is a great idea. I know I've shared the concierge program with a couple of folks that I've met that are new into the profession and excited about taking that first step towards certification. And they have said the concierge has been very helpful to helping them plan out where they need to go, what order I should take courses in, because sometimes when you look at the pathways offerings, there is a lot of material, there's a lot of content, and if you're new into this profession, knowing where to start can be very, very challenging. So I think it's great.
Yeah, it can be. It can be a little overwhelming. So taking advantage of having access to this concierge, I really recommend. It can get you started.
Super. Well, that's great. Anything else you'd like to share?
I just encourage people to go take a look at that calendar. It's out now. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at ccarpenter@nigp.org.
Super. Well, I look forward to seeing you in Louisville at Forum in August. And I look forward to seeing you again on Radio NIGP. Again,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Again, Shanda Carpenter with NIGP, Kirk Buffington saying good day.
Mark, what do you believe is the most pressing issue in public procurement today?
Well, right now, Keith, I believe that while the pandemic has had a few years to settle, and we're kind of no longer in the throes of it as we were in the beginning, I still believe that, along with global conditions, still causes us to experience supply chain challenges, whether they be logistic supply issues or price increases. As an entity that has a municipal-owned electric utility, as well as wastewater and water utilities, we're experiencing challenges on both sides. The logistics of having much needed items like transformers and wire and cable for the developments that are quickly popping up within the city of Lakeland, Florida. The lead times on those have just increased and continue to increase, as well as the commodities that are used for our water and wastewater departments, based, of course, the pipe and supply. Those challenges are still with us, and we continue to maintain an eye and an ear to everyone with their challenges and see what helpful hints and suggestions they might help us all go through to help alleviate these as we see them.
I think one of the most pressing issues in public procurement right now is employee retention. There's a lot of, ever since COVID, a lot of things have moved to more technology-based and work from home, and the government is kind of falling behind in those issues. And I think that we have to get with the times and create more drive and incentive for new procurement professionals to come.
Hello there, and welcome to Construction Junction. In following with this month's Radio NIGP theme, the procurement grab bag for our topic is non-payment of subcontractors. Many of us working with construction procurements have seen a rising trend in subcontractors contacting public entities claiming they have not received some or all of their payments from the prime contractor. So what is the typical best practice for public entities regarding payment of subcontractors? Best practice is to ask for and receive payment bonds for the total amount of the contract. Be sure to include language in your contract that requires the contractor to increase the amount of the payment bond when they receive change orders that increase the contract value. There are some cases where sureties require their bonded contractors to have all payments sent to a clearinghouse account, and they pay their subs through this account. This is a way the bonding company can monitor the payment of subcontractors. In addition to the request for bonds, the public entity can require notarized affidavits from each subcontractor and material supplier affirming timely payment to be included with each payment request from the prime contractor. Your contract should also contain the following language. You reserve the right to audit the accuracy and timeliness of all payments and supporting documentation between the prime contractor and any subcontractors. You reserve the right to send a copy of the payment bond to the suppliers. You reserve the right to furnish information regarding percentages of completion or the amounts applied for by the prime and action taken by the entities to any subcontractors that request this information. So those are all parts of the best practices we use for payment of subcontractors. But what can you do if your public entity wants other options? Some jurisdictions reserve the right to pay subcontractors directly. If you're going to pay the subcontractor directly, then here are some suggestions on how you should go about this. 1, use those audit powers to ensure that the subcontractor was not paid. 2, when you pay the subcontractor, require that the prime also sign the payment, acknowledging this payment is for goods and services rendered. Keep in mind that the public entity payment to subcontractors is rare and not a recommended best practice. Thank you for joining me on Construction Junction, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on Radio NIGP.
Hello, NIGP friends, and welcome to another episode of Radio NIGP. I'm David Nash with the Hot Topics Committee, and in keeping with our theme this month on Radio NIGP, bringing you an extra episode here of Hot Topics to provide you with another asset I think you might find of value, and that's a podcast called The Big Bid Theory. And I've invited Bill Culhane here to just discuss this with me. Bill has over 40 years of experience in private and public sectors, along with military service in the Air Force. And we've had some interesting conversations at Forum about the difference between the Air Force and the Army. He currently serves as the Vice President of Operations for Bid Prime and Beacon Bid, a pair of companies within the government purchasing sector. Drawing upon his varied experience, Bill oversees a multitude of aspects of the businesses to include client success, marketing, sales support, and logistics. His companies have also been forum sponsors, and he attends a number of trade shows throughout the year, and he was just at FAPO here a few weeks ago. For over 3 decades, he's also been a professional radio, television, and podcast broadcaster, MC, and speaker, participating in events across the United States. And he's another one of these guys I think, when does this person sleep? He's the co-creator and host of the Big Bid Theory podcast, which is now in its 9th season and distributed on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, and other platforms out there. The show focuses on topics targeted toward audiences interested in government purchasing and a broad range of industries, with Bill's special guest interviewees originating from those areas. So, Bill, tell us, how did the podcast come about?
A great question. And first of all, Dave, thanks for having us on the show. We sure do appreciate all the work that you do, Radio NIGP does, in helping to tell the story. So as far as the Big Bid Theory goes, you mentioned we're in our 9th season. When the show originally started 9 seasons ago, the goal, the idea was we would discuss a variety of industries out there, connected to industries that are purchasing from, our government agencies are purchasing from, those industries. And as everybody watching Radio NIGP knows, that's anything and everything. And so we certainly had a big bucket to pick from when it came to ideas and guests to have on. And that's kind of the way the show started. And the first 6 or 7 seasons of the show, we followed that model. But as many people in broadcasting understand, times change, things change, ideas change. And so about a year and a half ago or so, we decided to pivot, because what we found is that the original version of the Big Bit Theory, I could have a conversation with Chris DeLuzio, who's now a congressman, by the way. When Chris was at Pitt Cyber, we talked about election security. Well, if people were interested in cybersecurity and election security, that episode was of interest to them. And then in the next episode, I would have Dr. Colin Clark on, who's an expert on terrorism. Well, again, that's not for everybody. And so it was, we were casting a wide net when it came to topics and guests. And so we decided about a year and a half ago that we would be more laser focused. And so we kind of changed things up where we would start putting together, producing episodes that had to do specifically with people involved in government purchasing, and thinking that that would resonate maybe with a broader audience, because as you know, Radio NIGP does it on every episode. There are many stories to tell. There's so much to learn when it comes to government purchasing. So that's again the model that we followed. We're following here in season 9, even going back to season 8. You yourself, of course, you were a guest on the show as well. And so that's where we are right now. We've been doing it a long time. And as you mentioned, we are on a variety of platforms out there. You went through my bio. I've got a face for radio. I've been doing radio, TV, podcasts for a long time. And so I enjoy it. It's not the thing I do, but it's certainly one of the things I do. And it certainly brings me joy to know that we are helping to tell the important story.
As you mentioned, I was on your show last year, and you invited me to talk about contract administration, which both of us, we met at Forum last August in Boston, and that was a hot subject, a hot topic, as it were, at the time. And so I came on the show and talked about that. But tell me about this. We were talking earlier before we came on the air about your most recent episode. Could you tell us how that came about and why you thought it was?
And it's a great example. It's kind of an example of the template that we followed since we did the before mentioned pivot. And so, I was at NCAGP. I guess it was back in February or so, maybe March or so. I'm on the road so much, things kind of blend together sometimes. But I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm at the show. I was representing Beacon Bid there in the exhibit hall, and you've been to those shows, Dave. You meet a lot of people, strike up conversations with a number of people, like you and I did in Boston a year ago. And anyway, Fred Nielsen, who is a purchasing manager with the city of Durham, came by, and he and I started talking about life, talking about Beacon Bid, talking about transparency and competition, all the things you and I have talked about before. And I mentioned the podcast, I mentioned the show, and that's full disclosure. That's where I find a number of people who ultimately become guests on the show. Is that personal one-on-one, look him in the eyeball kind of conversation. I don't, you made the joke earlier about pointing into the phone book, closing your eyes and pointing into the phone book. That's not how I get the guests for the show, how we get the guests for the show. So anyway, so I met Fred, and he mentioned at that time he was getting ready to retire. And, I don't know if we're going to talk about it here in a moment, but that's one thing I've found as I've gone around. There are a lot of people who are leaving government purchasing for whatever reason. And so Fred's retiring. And so I stayed connected with him. And I joked with you, I found out as I tried to get reconnected with Fred, I found out that when he said he was getting ready to retire, he meant really soon.
Really soon.
So it took a little bit of effort to find my friend Fred again. I did. And then he made the suggestion to bring on Lauren Davis, who is serving as the interim purchasing manager there for the city of Durham. And I thought that was a wonderful idea. The more voices, I think you agree, Dave, the more voices we hear from, the better. Mm-hmm. And so, I hopped in studio yesterday, and so we got the episode put together. Now, this, it's kind of like putting a puzzle together. the puzzle pieces. We'll get those put together, and it'll hit the streets next week, hopefully, and somebody will find some value. It's as I mentioned to Fred and Lauren yesterday, our approach with the big bid theory is if it resonates with somebody or 10 people or even 100 people, that's that makes the fireworks go off for us. We're not selling to sponsors, right, advertisers, right? I mean, I see you nodding your head, Dave. So, So again, we're excited about that episode, and we're excited about the episodes to come as we continue to tell the story of government purchasing.
Cool. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember from last year. Each episode is what, 30 minutes?
Approximately. There again, having been in the TV world, radio world, and still dabbling in it a little bit, you have time restrictions, commitments to sponsors. We don't have that, but we do try to stay in the neighborhood of 30 minutes per episode. The drive home is what we call it.
So it's for people out there, wherever they get their podcasts, they can put it on their phone or listen to it going back and forth to work. It's an easy listen. I've got I don't know if I should say shamelessly, but I went back and listened to the to mine that I did with you last year, and it was interesting to see how you pieced it all together. One last question here before we get out is, have you got anything on the horizon for the next show, or some ideas percolating in the back of your mind that you're looking to talk about on your show?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I appreciate that. And so I mentioned, Dave, as I go around to these various shows, run into people like you, one of the things that I've been hearing about, the stories I've been hearing about, are people who are leaving government purchasing again, whether it be retiring, moving into another position, whatever the case may be. Well, another thing or topics we've been hearing about are, agencies, people in purchasing looking for tools to help them more easily write better bids. You mentioned it during our conversation that we had last season, Dave, how, putting together a solid bid, writing a good bid is the start of the process and is so important. I agree with you. So we'll be visiting with government agency people to talk more about that and finding more bidders. As I cross paths with people at these events, there's saying there are instances where they're in a no bid situation. And so we're going to start talking about those topics.
That's always tough when you put something out there and you don't get any responses. Well, our time's come to an end here. I sure appreciate you joining us today on this broadcast of RadioNIGP, Bill, and I wish you continued success. And I'm looking forward to. I assume you're going to Louisville for Forum, so
we will be there.
I'm looking forward to running into you there, and we can have some more conversation. So, NIGP friends, that's it for this episode. And I hope you'll join us again on our next version of RadioNIGP. Thank you.
Sure. So for us at the City of St. Cloud, our most pressing issue is finding procurement professionals. I know there's a shortage of procurement professionals across the country, and it really is impacting our agency. So we continue to strive to find some, but it is an ongoing challenge.
I believe it's meeting the challenges of federal requirements as it applies to road constructions. Federal requirements are fluid. They're always being updated, if you will, and so making sure that we're keeping our solicitations and our resulting agreements in federal compliance is a challenge.
That about wraps up our review of pressing procurement issues. I'm Keith Glatz, and this is Radio NIGP.
Hey, I'm back. It seems like it's been a while since we've had a segment on I Don't Look Good in Orange. This story is actually courtesy of Terry McKee in Tennessee. Thank you so much, Terry. He always sends me great stories. And so that if you share them with me, you might see them either on my page or here in Radio NIGP.
But in any case, you all, by now, we have fashioned this show after things that you all brought up in perch issues. And this one is about dual employment, brought to you by the town of Mason in Tipton County, Tennessee. The town of Mason had 2 employees, a finance officer, Reva Marshall, and also an HR manager, Michelle Scott. Both of those employees were hired before COVID to work in their respective positions. And in a recent investigation, it was found out that they also were both employed by the Memphis Shelby County School System. Now, just to start off this story, Reva was making, or she had basically gotten the town for $80,000, almost $81,000, just in compensation and benefits alone. Michelle had gotten the town for $87,000. On top of this, what they found out was that these ladies were writing checks. And of course, who could have a good scandal without P card fraud, misusing their P cards? Well, I don't even have to go into that. Y'all know how I feel about that. And how I feel about defrauding the government. If you absolutely have to do something, don't defraud the government of all people. Why? Because they hold the records. They can go back forever and ever. Amen. And I'm sure that's what happened. Remember, it doesn't make sense to me to begin with because you've got to report both of these incomes to tax institutions. And so it's easily found, easily traced. And so what they found was that they were duly employed at both places, but they were supposed to be working 40 hours at both places. How can that happen? What became of this is that the town was found that they didn't have enough controls in place to cover or to prevent any of these fraudulent items. And so now they have consultants, and they've hired different firms to take care of things like audits, to do their payroll and such. What happened to Michelle and Reva? I don't know. They're recently indicted. So you guys follow this story in the newspaper. And just remember, if you are going to attempt to do a dual employment type situation, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but just do it the right way. Make sure both your employers know that that's what you're doing and that you have in the files exactly how that's supposed to work out. I say to you all of this because I don't want to see you in jail. And of course, I might look good in this charcoal, but I'll never look good in orange. Thank you all so much. And remember to keep sending me articles. I appreciate it.
Hello, friends. Meaningful connections about public procurement issues support your success. RadioNIGP, and particularly this broadcast, bring timely topics to share and to chat among NIGP members. As in many public procurement situations, the words, "it depends," is the beginning of suggested solutions. Indeed, the best solution does depend upon many factors. And this concept of understanding the factors is what makes a procurement professional like you successful. For example, simply learning about unintended consequences that your decision may cause will make a difference as you support uninterrupted operations for your entity. The great news is that NIGP provides us with the opportunity and many ways to learn and share with those who have already experienced a particular issue. We are welcoming and respectful. We don't focus on our egos. We don't hoard information, we share it. We've all been through something new at some point. Our profession is evolving, and like the rest of information in our time, it is expanding at an incredible rate. We are wise to work interdependently by actively sharing with our colleagues and our businesses. What's the best practice for success in public procurement? Working with and in support of our colleagues via NIGP. Thank you.